On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
It's 10 o'clock. Do you know who your children are marrying? Yes, intermarriage, the taboo that seems to not be so taboo anymore. And with new numbers released for Canada, we are discussing how this has shifted in recent years and what we can learn about that. Plus, of course, a word of wisdom, a question of the week, and more coming up. I'm Avi Finegold, and along with Matthew Leibl and guest Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, we are not in heaven. Matthew, are you aware that Shar Zedek, I believe that's your synagogue, is one of the more quieter bathrooms in all of the city of Winnipeg?
Well, it used to be my synagogue. I haven't been there for 4 years, but I did spend a long time there, and I did work there for 17. They just did a new reno. So this doesn't completely surprise me, but I guess there was a study that a couple of local lads did who I remember from when they were very, very young, and they found that this newly renovated bathroom at my old shul, I guess, is one of the top. one of the quietest ones.
Well, you should hear the whole story. It's a really nice, heartwarming story. You can listen to it on the CJN Daily, our sister podcast with Ellen Besner. But I love that they went to University of Manitoba. They almost got kicked out of another bathroom because they could only be one person in at a time, and they had to explain they were doing a study. And they go to their synagogue and they find out that because there's no hand dryers because of Shabbat, they use pre-cut paper towels and a variety of other things. It is one of the quieter bathrooms. And I was like, oh, another one for Winnipeg.
Yeah, I guess this is a feather in our cap for sure. I'm not sure where you display an award that you win because of a bathroom. Bathroom has always had funny little exceptions in Judaism, like you don't put even a mezuzah on a bathroom door, but maybe we need some kind of special recognition for all the bathrooms. It feels very George Costanza for me. He would always pride himself on knowing anywhere in New York City and Manhattan where the nicest facilities were, and you could give him an address, an intersection, and he'd tell you the closest, most acceptable and most beautiful bathroom.
Yeah, 27th floor, ask for Maureen. She'll take care of you.
Yeah. She'll give you the key. And
Phoebe, you remember this, right? I just mentioned, and I mentioned it at the top, Phoebe Maltz-Bovey, welcome to Not in Heaven.
Honored to be here.
I miss podcasting with you.
Nice to be with you again, yes.
What a first conversation to walk into there, right? That's a pretty great introduction for Phoebe.
How are things on the Jewish angle?
They're very Jewish and extremely angular.
Are they acute or are they obtuse? The question that I have for you, Phoebe, is I know that you went to school on the south side of Chicago, as did I for a little while. Did you run into a certain individual who eventually became Pope Leo XIV?
Oh, you mean my college boyfriend? No, just kidding. I'm trying to be intermarriage themed.
Did you see that video of this woman who actually was the Pope's college girlfriend?
No, I didn't know the Pope had a college girlfriend.
It's great.
Okay, I'm not the same age as the Pope.
Where they're like, we're watching the video, and this family, they're like, yeah, we were watching the video, and we were like, oh my god, mom's situationship in college is now the Pope.
Well, okay, I saw something kind of in a roundabout way about that, where somebody had posted something like it was a Wikipedia linking to all the different popes throughout history who had not been lifelong celibate. I don't know whether that was in reference to this, but I have not been very much following the Pope stuff. But it is, yes, he is from near the University of Chicago.
Yeah, it's a thing. And in Chicago, it's becoming huge. There's so many memes about it. Sports-based ones, pizza-based ones, all of this. All of a sudden, it's reverential. It's like, wow, this guy that I knew, and then he's so amazing now. He's the Pope. And I keep thinking the opposite would happen if Jews had a Pope. Oh, Rabbi, Goldstein, he was my camp counselor. Or the opposite. He was my camper. He wet the bed. He was always mad at other kids. like he's a nothing. No matter if he was the Pope, like that's what would happen in the Jewish community. Is yeah, whatever. Yeah, I know this guy. It's not a big deal.
What about there would be nobody shepping any nachas? You think that if your grandson became the Pope or the Kohen Gadol or whatever, you don't
that would
think
be the joke. Like the mother at the first mass, and she'd be like, "Oh, you see this guy up there? You're doing the Pope? Yeah, his brother's a doctor.
No job for a Jewish boy or whatever that old line is." Yeah.
Exactly. Phoebe, I was waiting for the relaunch, apparently, of Tablet Magazine. And now that it's out yesterday, I was really underwhelmed.
Yeah, I mean, I had seen, as I know you also had, that when you went to Tablet's website, first there was, I don't know if there still is, just like some kind of eyeball.
Yeah, that creepy eyeball.
And a prompt to put in your email address.
Yeah.
And normally Tablet had just been a free website you could go to and look at articles on. So it looked a little like it had maybe been hacked. But then it turns out, no, it's just becoming paywalled.
Yeah, and it's Build Back Better. You know, it's like not only are they saying that like, well, it's paywalled because nothing good is free. That's like their big tagline. But they're also like, you're not the media. That was the big message that Alana Newhouse was sending out. She's the editor-in-chief. And, you know, we're here to give you the truth and to give you the facts. And you don't have to read through all these other sites to find out the truth. You could just come to us and read the truth. I found that a little icky. They're basically saying you don't have to read anything else. You can just read us. That's why you have to pay us, but we'll take care of everything for you. And we'll be your like Jewish Fox News. And that's the vibe that I get. And if, I don't know, what are you thinking, Phoebe?
The thing that this sounds like it is promising to be exists, and it's called the Free Press, Barry Weiss's magazine, basically online magazine. And I don't know anything about the behind the scenes of Tablet's finances, but whatever the case, the fact that something like the Free Press, which has a similar slant and similar broader topics, is charging quite a bit for subscriptions and seemingly doing quite well, makes me think they saw that there's a market for this and that they can charge for it.
Anyone, in my opinion, I don't read Tablet, that's not really my scene, but anyone who purports to be the be-all and end-all for truth, that's a red flag. I mean, the whole idea is that if you're that confident in your news, say, read mine, read everybody else's, and compare for yourself. Like I've always said, like, let your work stand up against the other work. But this kind of like this blanket statement, we'll do all the work, just come to us. That's like somebody telling me, this is the truth. Okay, sure, whatever you say.
A new study on Canadian Jewry was published recently by Robert Brim. There's a great cover article about it in the inaugural issue of Scribe Quarterly, the CJN's new print magazine. And last week, a section of the research focusing on intermarriage in Canada was released in the Canadian Jewish Studies Journal. The numbers show that intermarriage is no longer as rare as it used to be in Canada, with a 7 to 9 point jump to around 30%. That's a little confusing because they use two different definitions, right? Jews by religion and Jews by standard definition. I personally tend to think of myself as a high definition Jew, but that's a different discussion. Younger Jews are more likely to intermarry than older ones, and men are more likely to do so than women. I want to start with you, Phoebe. I know we've talked about it on Bonjour Chai. You're an astute observer of the Canadian Jewish landscape. What are some of the things that jumped out at you from this new study?
I mean, so I should say I know much more about intermarriage in 19th century France than I do about really anything to do with Canadian Jewish anything, because I did my doctoral dissertation on this topic. But the thing that jumped out at me about it is how different the numbers are for Canada than for the States, in conjunction with the fact that anecdotally, with all the caveats about anecdotes, I know many Jewish families in my part of Toronto, and I don't know that any have like 4 Jewish grandparents. Like it's either the parents are intermarried or their parents were intermarried or something like this, right? So I know a ton of intermarried Jewish households in Canada, arguably more than I would in the States. And I'm wondering whether I'm seeing some unrepresentative sample of Canadian Jews or whether it's being measured differently in Canada versus the States, like who's Jewish and who isn't, things like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that you probably are seeing a representative sample of Canadian Jewry outside of Orthodox populations, or outside of like places where establishment Jews, right, Jews that go to synagogue semi-regularly or involved with Federation or other major Jewish organizations, they tend to not be in downtown areas. But on the point of the orthodoxy, Matthew, you are not an Orthodox rabbi, and I believe you do perform intermarriages.
I have been for a long time, even before I was a rabbi for many years, yeah.
Do you find yourself having to defend that action, or...
Defend what I do, you mean? Or the marriages?
Both. Or do you find that, like, at this point, it's a fait accompli and people just accept it and move on?
Okay. I've been doing... I usually call them dual faith weddings because I found that like intermarriage and interfaith have just such a negative connotation that, you know, words are important. So I've been doing these dual faith ceremonies since 2013, like 12 years. And I've only been a rabbi since 2017. So for a number of years before that. And I think that was kind of an easier way to come to it. Was I'm not a rabbi. This is kind of an easier thing to do because the landscape in Winnipeg, like in a lot of places in 2013, was you couldn't find very many people who were rabbis or with rabbinic style training, like super educated lay people who would be able to officiate these ceremonies. But early on, what gave me a lot of confidence and why I don't really get a lot of pushback about this is because I did a ceremony and there was an elderly couple there and I knew them well from the community. He was a successful businessman, a Holocaust survivor. And after the ceremony, he pulled me over to the side and he said, you know, I was really, really torn about coming. I think this wedding was back in 2015. And he said to me, I was really, really torn on coming because, you know, she's Jewish and we know her whole family. But this guy she's marrying, I'm sure he's fine, but, you know, he's not Jewish. And I really didn't know what this was like. And then he kind of smiled at me and said, but the way you did it, this was a good thing. So that interaction, that story, I mean, I've been in a position where I've been a young man in an old man's world, an old person's world, for a long time, working in the synagogue as a 19-year-old. I always tried to be very careful to balance what I was taking from an older crowd in terms of, are they being stuck in their ways or are they being open to change? And when this fellow in that moment was very open to it, I realized this is not something people are fighting back on the way they probably used to. They just want it to be given the right kind of treatment, the right context. You know, it wasn't a Jewish wedding and I didn't treat it like a straight Jewish wedding, but it recognized the fact that this could be a positive union, that this still could further Judaism with their children, and better, and this is the whole reason I did it in the first place, better that they would have somebody who would be a positive rabbinic Jewish spiritual leader figure and give it even a chance. Because for so long, everyone said, no chance. You guys are bad. I can't officiate your wedding. You're done. Well, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy right there. So you got to give them a chance by giving them a positive experience. That's always steered me true. And I've been doing it for 12 years. And at least a third of the weddings, I would say, I do, of the 15 or so a year, are dual faith, if not more, closer between a third and a half. Yeah.
You know, you have Orthodoxy, which has had a large grip on, or traditionalism, which has a large grip on Canadian Jewish society until fairly recently. And if you're still part of the world where that is important and strong, then the numbers drop precipitously. But if you're not part of that world, if somebody is in Roncesvalles, not part of this large established Jewish community that is in Toronto, and somebody who's in Winnipeg, then you find people that are involved Jews that are doing Jewish things that are then saying, great, this is something that I can do and still feel proudly Jewish about and do those things. Yeah,
something I wanted to talk about. So the thing, when I say I did a dissertation on intermarriage, there are a lot of aspects of it, and I'm not going to obviously get into all of them. This was a 500-page document that my poor professors had to at least claim to have read. But the thing that strikes me for this particular conversation is that Napoleon wanted to make it so that Jews in the French Empire had to intermarry. He wanted to mandate that a certain number of weddings involving a Jew involved also a non-Jew. And the reason Napoleon wanted this was effectively to get rid of Jews, right? And when you have Jews talking about, like, certainly post-war Jews saying, don't intermarry, it'll be a second Holocaust, the point is not wanting, obviously, fewer Jews, wanting to have more Jews. But what's interesting that I was just reading about is that it seems like the demographic assumption from Jews, friends and foes, has long been that intermarriage means fewer Jews. And that may not always be the thing, right? It might be that intermarriage doesn't decrease the numbers. So how much of the negative Jewish sentiment towards traditionalists, let's say, towards intermarriage is about continuity and how much is about religion?
I think it's a great question because I actually think that the two got confused. I think that the sentiment for 2,000 years against intermarriage was about religion, was that you can't practice multiple faiths, and there was no civil marriage. There was no cultural, well, we're just two people getting married, so you're going to be married to another faith. But as you move more and more towards a secular society, the argument is about continuity, but continuity for continuity's sake. And that's where everything falls apart because, great, we have more people that identify with Jews and Judaism if you intermarry because you're sending out more stuff. And it's the opposite of keeping it within your community. And I think that's why, quote unquote, the people that see we're losing the intermarriage debate are feeling it as losing. And the people that just see it as, well, no, we want to be out there in the world are seeing it as winning.
Yeah. So I would say that children of mixed marriages being raised Jewish does exist. I have the anecdotal evidence of that they're opening a brand new Hebrew school in my neighborhood because of the amount of interest. And it is not coming from, I guess, traditionalist Jewish families because just there aren't really any. But I think my anecdotal evidence isn't maybe the most interesting thing I can add here. I think what's more interesting is what it says about society that this is the case, because it's extremely new that the children of these marriages would want to be Jewish, that their parents would want them to be Jewish. This was a way of getting out for Jews who didn't want to be Jewish in previous generations. And I think what's new is that there's a society so welcoming of Jews. We speak a lot about anti-Semitism, but this is a society so welcoming of Jews in everyday life that there are people who want in. I think there is something demographically new about children of intermarriage being raised Jewish and that this didn't used to happen so much.
I see a whole range. I see everything. I see couples who have a bris for their kids and then if they need to take the kids to the mikveh. I have seen where they don't do that at all. And I mean, that's a huge range right there in itself in one particular point of practice. I've seen families that are super strong. And I guess what we would describe as like the kids are being raised Jewish, whether that's school, camp, community, still very aware of the cultural background that their non-Jewish parent inherited and what that means for their greater family on that side, Christmas usually, and other things that go with that too. So I've seen it work. I've seen it not work. And by not work, I guess I mean it from more of like a practice and a continuity kind of standpoint. I don't think the fear about intermarriage is, I've always said that I don't think it's as founded like we've kind of been discussing, but it's definitely, you kind of understand where they get there, this idea that it would just kind of, I guess, water it down or however you want to put it. But I've seen a whole range. I've seen all these sorts of things, but I definitely think that more and more and more people in North America, at least, like more Jews are going to continue to marry non-Jews. Like I don't see this changing. I don't see this going away. So I see it as our obligation as rabbis in that sense, or whatever we're doing to understand it, to study it, to figure it out, and to embrace it. Like I've been a person who like, this is my community, right? So my arms need to be around them. And I've always felt to be a good rabbi, you have to understand what they're saying, what they're telling you, not just like what you think is the rabbi who comes from a different perspective.
I hear this from a lot of rabbis where they'll say they're willing to do, and I don't know if this is true about you, Matthew, or not, they're willing to do this interfaith marriage provided all the children are going to be raised Jewishly within the home. And I think that's like highly offensive to put that sort of condition on an intermarriage, because you're essentially saying you now, if you want to marry this Jew, you have to deny whatever it is that you might believe in some way or another. And I've always found that to be icky.
Super icky. I don't like it.
My belief about these things is that even to say dual faith, I mean, sometimes people don't have a faith. Like I could say, I'm Jewish, my husband isn't, neither of us are religious people. Even if he converted and we were both Hasidic, it wouldn't matter. He has the cultural background he has, I have the cultural background I have. What does strike me as icky is the idea that you would have to kind of pretend that you don't have the cultural background you do, and that because, there are fewer Jews than Christians in the world, that you would have to somehow pretend that one part of your children's background doesn't exist. I think it cuts them off from other relatives. I think it cuts them off from the truth of who they are. And I think that would be strange to do. But this is apart from whatever decisions you're making about how to religiously raise your kids.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
I know I am the woman here and I'm going to do the gender thing, but if you talk about changes in intermarriage structurally over time, one is how friendly or not society at large is to Jews, how socially integrated Jews are or are not. But then there's also this question of, it used to be that Jewish men married out and Jewish women not so much, and the numbers have become much more the same. And
although the numbers in the study show that men still are more likely to marry non-Jewish
but not as much
spouses,
more likely.
Not nearly as much, yeah.
Right.
I was actually surprised by that, if I can make a quick interruption, because I always imagined that the other way around is somewhat easier, because even if you're a woman and you're Jewish and you marry somebody not Jewish, you can go and say to anybody, well, at least our kids are going to be Jewish and that'll be fine, and that's not a big deal. And in fact, conversion classes are often filled with non-Jewish spouses that happen to be women, and you don't find a lot of men that are marrying a Jewish woman in intermarriage classes, not nearly as much.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say that, like, Karen McGinnity, I think her name is, who's a scholar who studies intermarriage. I mean, like, I think it's her research that's about how Jewish women, basically no matter who they're married to, will sort of raise Jewish children. So that could be like another factor in why in the past intermarriage was just sort of, it was like men leaving the community, right? Because of who's doing most of the childcare, things like that.
Where I do wonder, where I do see in my practice kind of collisions between practice and identity. Because I think it's very easy to say you identify as a Jew, but, you know, what do you do as a Jew? And when I see a mixed family, a blended family, and there's pressure from both sides to do their rituals, you know, to have a bris, but also to have a baptism, I do wonder how that's going to play out in real time, because I think that is kind of new. The acceptance creates these new situations. Can you do both? I've always kind of thought, ultimately, you're going to have to choose one way or the other. Your parents may be different, but what are you? And I don't have an answer, but I do get people asking me these questions, and I do wonder, of course, where is this headed? Because I don't think you can be baptized and then have a bar mitzvah. Or can you? I've never seen it, but this is all very new.
I feel like there's a distinction between thick and thin ties to one's faith or one's culture or one's tradition. Historically, you were either in the community or you were not. I don't think that historically the rates were nearly as low as people imagine them to be in terms of intermarriage. It's just that you left the community and you were no longer Jewish and you just joined a parish and that was it. And you never heard from them again. So I actually think that we have the lowest rates of assimilation in the community historically now than we ever have before, because we have that ability to have loose ties. You're able to be Jewish and not necessarily do everything in your life within the Jewish community. So people want to be able to say, well, great, I want to be a little bit of both, and I'm not entirely within the community, but I don't have to feel the need to leave entirely, which is what I think happened historically, as I said. And now you have this big question, and you're seeing a lot more people saying, hey, I want this both ways. And I think that for the people who push continuity and no intermarriage and that it's important and all of this stuff haven't been emphasizing enough the idea that like, if you want your kid to be Jewish, they have to be raised Jewish. They have to be thickly Jewish, however it is that you define it. And if the only thing that happens within a Jewish framework in your life is telling your kids not to marry somebody else that isn't Jewish, then that's not going to work, because you're not doing anything that is Jewish in your life that gets your kids to say, you know what, maybe I want to be Jewish too.
Something I'm wondering about is just sort of how dated some of this is, because the thing you're describing is something I remember, like when I went on a birthright trip in early 2007, so not last week. It was all about this kind of continuity thing. And it already seemed like a message that people were not really getting from their own parents. Like that. So it feels a little strawmanish, like the secular Jew whose whole thing is opposing intermarriage. Like, this is just not a type of person you meet so much these days. At least I don't.
It's so hard to say no to this. How are you going to say no? People meet each other in so many different ways now. They're so integrated into a welcoming community, like you talked about, Phoebe. I just don't know how you'd be opposed to it. Where I think people feel comfortable is when they feel like their grandkids are going to be Jewish, which only they can really truly define, right? You know, it's always very interesting with these studies. You say Jewish with religion. What does that mean to everybody? I know what it means to me, but I'm a rabbi. Like, what does my friend down the street say that makes him either Jewish by religion or Jewish by the standard definition? It's always very interesting. A lot of these people, they identify as Jewish. You know, my dad's Jewish, my mom's not Jewish. We don't go to a Reform synagogue. We don't go to any synagogue. But yeah, we've got a tree and stuff, but we do the Hanukkah stuff. I'm Jewish. Like that person, I guess, that kid there is satisfying the part of the study that says that there are more and more children of intermarriages who identify as Jewish. Is that what it is? They see themselves? Like, I don't think they're getting the stamp of approval from any rabbi that they're Jewish or not to satisfy that.
Yeah, I mean, the family piece, just one other thing I'd say is, like, I think if you have adult children, not that I speak from experience, but if one has adult children, I think it's clear that it's hard to find a partner. You know, it's hard to find a person in your life. And I think even if there are Jews out there who are thinking like, oh, I would rather my child marry somebody Jewish, once their kid is 30, 40, finally meets somebody, you know, I don't think that you're going to get a lot of people who are like, no, hold out. You know what I mean? Like, right, I think that's just the reality of life. And if you're raising your kid outside of an extremely, extremely close-knit sort of not much outside interaction Jewish community in North America, they might meet whoever. And if you do care about whether it's religion or continuity, whatever, doing Jewish stuff would be more useful than saying, don't marry that person, and then who are they going to marry?
One of the things that was interesting about this specific study is that the numbers seem to show that in Montreal and Toronto, the intermarriage numbers are relatively lower than the rest of the Canadian population. Matthew, you live outside of Montreal and Toronto, although you have familiarity with those communities. What do you think it is about living in Winnipeg or somewhere that is not the hub of Judaism that makes these numbers skewed in some way or another?
I think that it makes sense. It makes sense intuitively, right? There's fewer Jewish people around, so it's very practical. Like, I don't think it's much more complicated than that. And usually what comes with living in a smaller place is you don't have the same Jewish infrastructure as I talk about it, right? Like, the smaller places don't have Jewish camps, don't have Jewish schools, don't have Jewish youth groups because they don't have the same number of Jews. When you got fewer Jews, you got all these fewer infrastructure. When I lived in Halifax versus living in Winnipeg, Halifax doesn't have a Jewish community center. Winnipeg has a massive Jewish community center. Like, that changes your ability to meet people, to congregate, to have programs, to all kinds of other things like that. So, smaller place, you're going to have more intermarriage because you just got fewer Jews.
Yeah, I think the argument you're making is that at some point you run out of swipes on JSwipe and there's just nobody left for you to date. And you're like, well, I guess I have to start marrying other people.
Yeah, you can't do that in Winnipeg. Like, even Winnipeg, which has a pretty active Jewish community, like, there's no online, like, there was never a JDate, really a strong JDate presence, if that was a thing, if I'm remembering that correctly, in Winnipeg, the way I think there was in Toronto. Like, there aren't people. There aren't the people.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, yeah, there is the whole, like, I guess all dating is online now. But if you're talking about just people meeting kind of incidentally in person, it's not even necessarily about, like, running out of the available Jews. It's like, who do you meet casually? Like, well, I will say that in New York, yes, Jews are 10% of the city population, but not dispersed like such that 1 in 10 of any group of people are Jewish. There are just like areas, like walk around West 96th Street and like you will find a Jewish spouse within 10 minutes if that's
but Winnipeg's exactly
literally
like that too.
Met my wife on West 96th Street.
Yes, I feel like we've talked about this.
I meet a lot of couples that are getting married, right? Because I do weddings. I give them the opportunity to talk about what their Jewish home looks like in the future. I'm sure it's one of the things that you do, Matthew, as well. And one of the things that I often hear is, yeah, we don't really do Shabbat now. This is just an example, right? But we're going to do it when the kids are around, right? Once we have kids, we're going to start doing Shabbat. And I always tell them that that's a huge mistake, because by the time your kids are around and old enough to recognize what's going on, if that's when you're going to start Shabbat, it doesn't feel natural for you. It's not who you are. And when something important comes up and it's a Friday night, well, you'll miss this Shabbat or you'll do that. And I tell them, I don't care. I'm not here to tell you what is better or worse or what's the way to do things. I just say, if that's what you want, you have to start doing whatever it is that you believe now, because then you really do it and believe it and feel it, and then you're going to be able to transmit that to your kids. And I see this happening not just within the Orthodox community, but however you raise your kids is how they are going to end up marrying. So if you raise your kids that Judaism is like camp, and we go to Hillel when you're in college, and you don't go to Jewish school, but you hang out with the other Jews, and we do Shabbat occasionally, but not every time, that's the type of Judaism that your kids are going to want, and are going to want to find somebody that will be able to do that with them, Jewish or not. And if you raise your kids in an Orthodox environment, and again, this is not a hard and fast rule, like 100% of the time everything's going to happen like this, but it happens more often than not. If you want your kids to be Orthodox, you raise your kids in an Orthodox environment, and that's what's going to happen. If you raise your kids in a observant Reform environment, your kids are going to do that because they understand that Shabbat is in synagogue, and we do Judaism in this way, that we do it, and that's an important value. Whatever values you want to impart to your kids, live them, do them, and tell them that this is important, not just, as we've said, just, I don't believe this, but you have to do X. And this is what I'm seeing in all of these numbers, is that we are starting to have more people that are comfortable with a different attachment to their Judaism, to the point where those kids are saying, that's okay. I don't need to have this deep attachment to Judaism. I'm going to find somebody and they're going to have a loose attachment with me. Parshat Emor is one of the sections in the Torah where the Jewish holidays are mentioned. Because it appears in the book of Vayikra, in the book of Leviticus, it includes a focus on the very sacrificial offerings associated with those holidays. One part of the Parsha contains a description, extended description actually, of the Omer offering and the subsequent counting of days leading up to the holiday of Shavuot. The Omer refers to this like sheaf of barley, right, that was offered on the second day of Passover, that was marking the beginning of the barley harvest. And starting from that day, this account of 7 weeks, 49 days, and that culminates in the holiday of Shavuot. And on Shavuot, 2 loaves of bread made from wheat, which are referred to as the Shtei HaLechem, they're offered, and that marks the beginning of the wheat harvest. And when the wheat comes in at Shavuot, you can breathe much easier because you can see that there's going to be wheat to eat at the end of the year. Essentially, the count mirrors the fact that we actually are waiting and anticipating when we know for sure when we're going to have a good place to be well fed in the land of Israel. And there's this term that psychologists use called anticipatory joy. I don't know if you've ever heard of this term. It's the idea that there's joy that you get from anticipating something really enjoyable and great and fun, whether it's a vacation or a concert or whatnot. And in fact, oftentimes the anticipatory joy is even greater than the joy itself. I guess the question that I have is, what is something that you count down to regularly, or that you eagerly anticipate that lives up to these expectations on a regular basis, or something that you count towards and didn't quite?
Yes. So I would say in the general sense, when it's not parka weather, because that's the thing in Toronto, you know, when you don't have to wear the giant winter coat, but more specifically, where I live in Roncesvalles, Toronto, there's a farmer's market, and it's year round, but for the cold seasons, it's held indoors somewhere that's not right near me. But then when it's starting Victoria Day weekend, they have it outside in a park that's closer by, and outdoor farmer's market season is something I look forward to with great anticipation. It's a whole it's a lot of fun. So I would say, yeah, outdoor farmer's market.
Awesome. Matthew, what is your anticipatory joy come from?
It's the NFL season.
Okay.
It's the NFL season. I never really thought about it before you put the question to me, Avi, but as I'm cycling through all these things, I'm thinking about my kids' birthdays, my own birthdays, my wife's birthday, my Jewish holidays. No, none of the, it's not that I don't look forward to them. When I worked on the radio, you have to understand that when you work on the radio and you can see the ticking clock, the whole idea of time ticking down and counting down is something that for six years of broadcasting, I was studying that clock. I know that something is always coming. I've got this programming for anticipation. So I'm going through this list of things. When did I ever have anticipatory joy? As the summer is coming to an end and we have our fantasy football drafts, and I know the NFL season's about to start, and my Sundays now are going to be, with football playing in the background, that gives me a great sense of joy. And now that I've realized this about myself, I'm having a bit of an existential crisis because I always thought I was more of a baseball fan than a football fan.
Yeah, the amount of days you count down towards spring training or when pitchers and catchers report, or even as a Canadian, not even CFL season.
No, not even CFL season. And that's not because of the Bombers or anything like that, but the NFL is king. Like, the NFL is everywhere. And in my life as a young man going to university and then becoming a broadcaster in sports and now, a father, the NFL and its watchability in both Canada and the United States has exploded from where it was in 2007 when I first kind of really started watching it, because I just didn't grow up on it in the same way. But it has changed, and yeah, I guess for sports fans, it's a big deal.
My favorite memes from the very top of the show about the new pope. So one that I saw was Chicago has managed to produce a pope before they could produce a quarterback who passed 4,000 yards.
That's very funny. And I think Phoebe is sitting there going, what are these jokes? What has happened?
I've heard of the thing where there is a sport and a ball is yeah.
Yeah. Phoebe, come on. It's part of the Canadian landscape, isn't it?
I'm sure it is. I'm sure lots of things are.
Lots of things.
There are also pucks, I'm aware.
Yeah.
There are pucks in hockey, yes. Oh, that we should not let the Menschwarmer guys hear about this.
All right. Mine is very interesting in that I'm aware that what's happening to me is that I'm being manipulated for this anticipatory joy, but yet I get joy in it nonetheless. And that is when you go online shopping and then you hit order and order is complete, and then they start sending you the updates, right? Your order is like in the queue, and then your order is it's got mailed, and then you get the updates as they're being mailed, and then you get it, and like, oh wow, the joy is so much more amplified because you have been sitting and thinking about the thing that you just bought for days and days, because they just keep reminding you about it. And I know that I'm being manipulated entirely in order to do this so that I can buy something else from the company again and again and again, but I get so much joy from that.
There's probably a backstory to that. I wonder if you were denied toys as a child and now you have. So
you like the emails about like your shipment is coming.
I'm telling you, they build in this anticipatory joy.
That is so interesting, because like I feel like half my inbox is like, your order from well.ca is a block away.
I delete them. I don't mind necessarily, like I see it and then it goes away.
Oh, you don't print them and frame them.
It reminds me that like, oh yes, I have this item. This item was supposed to come, and this item is like you said, a block away. It's on its way.
My wife does most of the shopping, and then those notifications are how I know how she's spending all of our money.
Okay.
Women do be doing that.
All right.
Say that.
I'm joking.
Thank you for listening to Not in Heaven. Our producer and editor is Zachary Kauffman. Michael Fraiman is the executive producer. To catch every episode, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to support our show, consider making a donation to the CJN at thecjn.ca/donate.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.